In today's video, we're taking an in-depth look at a case that has left investigators, families, and entire communities searching for answers. This is a narrative packed with unexpected turns, concealed truths, and a timeline that just doesn't seem to align the story of a teenager named Carrie Winkler. She visited her mother's residence on Tift Court in Crestview, Florida on the evening of January 6, 2006. Around 11 o'clock at night, the 33-year-old blonde nurse had not responded to calls all evening, which was unusual for the caring mother who always connected with her children. Carrie and her boyfriend entered the house believing that her mother, Melissa Howard, would simply be unwinding after a day that should have been joyful. What she discovered instead would haunt her for the remainder of her life. During the trial, they asked, "What did you see as the light improved?" Winkler replied, "My mom is lying there." Melissa Howard had been severely beaten and stabbed numerous times. As she lay face down in a pool of her own blood, a knife was lodged in her throat. That woman would never again see her son. After enduring so much to bring him home, Melissa Lynn Howard was born in May 1972 to Janet Beal Gilsdorf and Howard. She became the kind of individual that everyone in her small town hoped for: a determined nurse and a devoted mother. She was a woman whose warmth uplifted everyone around her. Employed as a nurse at the North Okaloosa Medical Center, she was 33 years old. Howard was divorced and had 3 children. Known as a petite, fit, blonde beauty by her friends, Missy lived in Crestview, Florida. The people she worked with admired her greatly. As an operating room nurse at the North Okaloosa Regional Medical Center, her colleagues adored her. It was said that Melissa was an active and fit woman who prioritized raising her 3 kids above all else. Ultimately, Melissa's best friend, Jennifer Knutson, would share a sentiment about her that truly captured her essence. She had a way of putting you at ease. If you felt frightened, she would hold your hand and make you laugh. She took care of her clients. She cared for her children. She was incredible. Melissa had a gorgeous smile and was compassionate, yet her life was anything but simple. As a single mom working long shifts at the hospital, she faced numerous challenges to provide the best life possible for her 3 kids. 2 girls from a prior relationship and her younger son, Taylor. The custody battle over Taylor had been extremely challenging. It had dragged on for months and drained both financial resources and emotional energy. She and her soon-to-be ex-husband, Brian Howard, were embroiled in an ugly custody dispute that had dominated her life for years. The troubling situation was exacerbated by the tangled web of relationships that emerged around the divorces. Jen Knudsen would later say that it was an incredibly complicated web. It was as if everyone had split with some siding either with Brian or Melissa Howard. Jennifer Knudsen and her husband, along with David Russell Holbrook Jr. and his wife Darlene, were friends until what was once a tight-knit circle of friends transformed into bitter enmities and shattered relationships, yet Melissa persevered through it all. She possessed a strong determination, was highly motivated, and deeply cherished her children. Those who were familiar with her remarked that she always prioritized what was best for her family. Regardless of the challenges in January 2006, Melissa ultimately achieved what she had been striving for after years of legal battles. At 33 years old, she was separated from her former spouse, Brian Howard, and had custody of their son, Taylor. An ending that appeared fitting for a difficult chapter of life was on the verge of transforming into the beginning of a nightmare that would keep an entire community awake at night. For over 10 years, Melissa should have been preparing for a celebration in the days leading up to January 6, 2006, following a lengthy and contentious custody battle. She finally secured full custody of Taylor. Her 11-year-old son was set to move in with her permanently, but this victory came at a price. Tensions flared among people due to the custody dispute, and there were many who disagreed with the court's decision around the time of her passing. She had just emerged victorious from a bitter custody battle. Brian Howard was obligated to hand over their son Taylor into the care of his ex-wife Dana Holbrook Jr. A friend of her ex-husband Brian appeared at her doorstep on January 4, 2006, just 2 days before her tragic death. The events of that meeting would play a crucial role in uncovering the truth behind her brother's death. Jennifer Knudsen, who was also Melissa's closest friend. Knudsen was conversing with Melissa when Holbrook arrived, and she found the visit quite odd. When I asked her who it was, she replied it was Russell. Knutson mentioned that Newton claimed the unexpected drop-in left both her and Melissa feeling uneasy, but the true threat that was looming ahead was far worse. There was no valid reason for Holbrook to approach me. He had an important message, one that would instill fear in Melissa and set off the deadly chain of events that followed. Burke, who assisted Howard in gaining custody of his children, spoke to the victim merely 2 days before she was discovered dead inside her home in Crestview. Melissa was found with numerous stab wounds. After Holbrook departed, she was frightened and promptly reached out to her attorney, Janice Burke. Their subsequent conversation would become vital evidence many years later. Burke recounted how Howard had stated, "I knew this would happen." I inquired about the meaning behind her words. Her voice trembled with fear as she disclosed, "Brian sent one of his men to intimidate me." This was more than just an awkward social visit. That was an act of intimidation. It was a clear threat. Melissa further explained exactly what Holbrook had told her during his menacing visit. Russell warned her, "Let the boy be with his father and you need to move on," as she later conveyed to me. In court, Burke testified that Howard was agitated post-Holbrook's visit, and they discussed the custody arrangement. It's understandable if you're not willing to relinquish control of Taylor. Terrible consequences were hinted at, but Melissa Howard was not one to be intimidated. She had fought too fiercely for too long to back down now. Melissa felt both fear and determination simultaneously. She had battled long and hard to maintain custody of her son, and no intimidating threats would force her to concede. However, someone was observing. Someone had devised a plan and was ready to execute it to prevent Melissa Howard from keeping Taylor. For her family, Melissa Howard's Saturday, January 6, 2006 started off just like any ordinary Saturday. She was preparing for Taylor's arrival, making last-minute arrangements, and organizing everything for what should have been the most memorable day of her life. The preparations consumed her entire day. Tragically, Howard would pass on the very day when she was meant to gain full custody of her son. As the evening approached, Melissa was in high spirits despite the recent stressful occurrences. At that time, she was seeing a married man named Christopher Cadenhead. Their relationship was complicated, but it offered her someone to confide in during a challenging period. Chris was married at the time, but based on investigations, he was involved with Melissa. Cadenhead was the last individual to speak to her around 8:50 p.m. They chatted on the phone on January 6, 2006, and the conversation concluded at 8:52 p.m. Evidence indicated that Cadenhead was the last person to contact Howard. Their call ended at 8:52 p.m., and no one would hear Melissa's voice again for over 10 years. The next couple of hours remained a mystery, but those 100 minutes would alter everything permanently. During that crucial period, someone arrived at Melissa's home. Someone she recognized, someone she trusted enough to grant entry. The scene revealed no signs of forced entry, and theft did not seem to be the motive. Melissa's belongings, including her bag, were untouched. The defense argued there was no evidence of a break-in, and Howard would not have permitted Holbrook inside. Given that her home was equipped with a security camera, Jarvis speculated that the victim knew her assailant and felt safe enough to let them in. The person who visited that night didn't intend to commit robbery. They had come with a far more sinister purpose. Around 11 p.m., Melissa's daughter, Carrie, along with her boyfriend, arrived at the Tift Court residence. She had been attempting to reach her mom the entire night and grew anxious when Melissa failed to respond. Carrie and her boyfriend arrived at the house on Tift Court that evening. She was concerned after calling her mom all night without an answer. A woman was discovered deceased after her daughter Carrie and her boyfriend arrived at the house between 10:50 p.m. and 11 p.m. The scene Carrie encountered upon entering the house was beyond her comprehension. Her mother, the very person who had nurtured and loved her unconditionally, lay brutally slain on the floor. Shortly afterward, Chris arrived and made the distressing 911 call that directed police to the location. Cadenhead, Howard's boyfriend, who was married, also informed the police about the horrific discovery when he dialed 911. As I entered, I moved closer and noticed a pool of blood near her head. She was lying on her back. The scene was unimaginably gruesome. She was found face down in a puddle of blood. Her body had been stabbed and severely beaten. Melissa had suffered a brutal blow to the head and someone had slashed her throat. The ferocity of the attack was alarming. This was not a robbery gone awry or a random act of violence. The atmosphere felt deeply personal. This was fueled by rage. The assailant intended for Melissa Howard to take her last breath. Signs of a struggle were evident. The couch cushions lay scattered everywhere. Melissa had fought with all her might to survive, but her attacker was overpowering. The prosecution asserted that this was not a theft, since valuable items like a purse were left untouched. Melissa had intended to begin a new chapter with her son that very day, but instead, she lost everything. The mother, who battled fiercely to reunite with her child, would never see him again. When police arrived at the murder scene on Tift Court, they were met with a brutal crime, lacking a clear suspect and minimal physical evidence. The absence of forced entry immediately indicated to them that Melissa recognized her killer. The defense argued there was no evidence of a break-in, claiming Howard would never have admitted Holbrook into her home due to her security camera. Jarvis believed the victim was acquainted with the murderer and felt secure enough to permit them entry. The timing of the murder was particularly unsettling. Howard was killed on the very day she was supposed to gain full custody of her son Taylor. This certainly can't just be a random occurrence, one investigator remarked regarding the case. The investigation continues to haunt the Crestview community. Investigators promptly delved into Melissa's turbulent custody battle, which had consumed her for months. Her ex-husband, Brian Howard, who was recently stripped of custody of their son, emerged as the prime suspect. Following the murder, Brian Howard was interrogated, but he provided a solid alibi, revealing he was out dining on the night of his ex-wife's death. Due to the circumstances, authorities scrutinized Brian, yet his flawless alibi led them to eliminate him as a suspect swiftly. According to police, Howard's ex-husband was dining out the night she passed away. Once Brian was exonerated, officers explored other potential suspects, closely examining Melissa's married boyfriend, who discovered the body. However, it was clear that Melissa and Cadenhead's relationship was far from simple. Jarvis aimed to illustrate that Cadenhead had both the opportunity and potential motive to commit the crime. Nevertheless, Cadenhead was married, only revealing his affair to his wife when he called her that night, after he found the body of the victim. Ultimately, the defense contended that Cadenhead could have had multiple motives for killing Howard. Jarvis argued that Taylor, now an adult, alleged Cadenhead was at the house the night of the murder and prevented him from looking inside a bag. According to the defense, Howard's boyfriend might have killed her after she claimed she was pregnant, despite the assertion that her tubes were tied. However, Jarvis claimed she was not pregnant, and the timing didn't convincingly place Cadenhead as the perpetrator. Cadenhead's ex-wife, who later divorced him and remarried, stated he returned home between 9 p.m. and 9:15 p.m. Drake commented that numerous questions regarding Howard's death remain unanswered. A year after his tragic death, an officer from the Crestview Police Department informed a reporter that the murder might have been carried out by a hired professional. FBI agent Richard Trent stated to the Daily News, "We haven't received anything that connects this to any individual. There was an alarming absence of physical evidence. We have no way to identify anyone except for her. All the blood found at the scene belonged to her. There were no fingerprints. No DNA or murder weapons discovered elsewhere. It seemed like the killer vanished without a trace, but the police had one significant fact. This attack was personal. The brutality of the murder, the numerous stab wounds, the blows to the head and the throat being cut, spoke volumes. This act was committed by someone filled with rage, someone who couldn't trust Melissa Howard to intimidate them ever again." The investigation reached a standstill. Almost no physical evidence, a clear motive, nor a solid suspect were found. The case saw little advancement. Nevertheless, the officers on the case refused to throw in the towel. Melissa Howard's murder lingered unsolved for a decade, leaving her family in relentless fear that her killer was still out there and could be living a normal life while she lay buried. There were numerous potential suspects who had reasons to harm her. Yet there was hardly any concrete evidence. She had to wait over 10 years for justice due to the unresolved nature of her case, until detectives utilized new technology that was not available until many years after her death. The case file became disorganized, with new detectives coming and going. Melissa's children grew up without their mother, and it seemed as if the person responsible had escaped justice. Technology would ultimately bring Melissa's killer to light in 2015, almost a decade after her passing. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement reopened the investigation. The Crestview Police Department and the Office of the State Attorney for the First Judicial Circuit collaborated in May 2015. In the 18 months since 2006, agents, investigators, analysts, and attorneys employed methods that were not available back in 2006. It was peculiar that the jacket Melissa wore the night she died led to a breakthrough, but in May 2015, the police revisited the case. In this instance, Melissa's jacket was sent for analysis. David was linked to the scene because DNA evidence matched him. The DNA of David Russell Holbrook Jr. was discovered. He was the same individual who had visited Melissa. 2 days before her murder, he sought to intimidate her regarding the custody battle, yet the DNA evidence was just the beginning. When law enforcement scrutinized Holbrook's alibi from the night of the murder, they uncovered some intriguing inconsistencies. The DNA findings were astonishing. David was matched to the scene due to the DNA evidence. The DNA of David Russell Holbrook Jr. was identified. He was the same individual who had gone to visit Melissa 2 days prior to her death to instill fear regarding the custody issue. But who really was David Russell Holbrook Jr. around the time he was implicated? He held a position as a program manager and SRP test engineer at Strategic Defense Solutions in Meridianville, Alabama, located near Huntsville. Colleagues who knew him in a professional capacity perceived him as just another defense contractor engaged in classified projects. However, there was more to Holbrook than met the eye. Drake mentioned that Holbrook, who was physically imposing, had ample opportunity to harm Howard, who was considerably smaller. Holbrook had military training and had a fascination with knives due to his military background. He excelled in close combat and was adept at wielding sharp instruments. For Melissa, a petite nurse with no fighting training, he would have been a terrifying and insurmountable adversary. But the DNA evidence was just the beginning. As law enforcement delved deeper into Holbrook's alibi from the night of the murder, they uncovered some very intriguing discrepancies. The authorities reported that David Holbrook misrepresented his whereabouts the night of the murder and when he last encountered Howard. Holbrook initially claimed he hadn't seen Melissa in years, but when presented with evidence, he began to alter his narrative. Moreover, the police found David's inconsistent stories to be untrustworthy. He began by saying he hadn't seen Melissa in years, but later claimed he had visited her home just 2 days prior to the murder, providing an excuse for the night of January 6th. His reasoning was that he had been at a birthday celebration, but surveillance footage revealed that he had left the party for an extended period. Holbrook insisted that he was at a celebration when the murder occurred. He said he only stepped out to drop his kids off at their mother's place, looked for some medicine at a convenience store, and finally found it at a Walmart. He then returned to the celebration. Holbrook informed authorities that while he was at the party, he left momentarily and stopped at Walmart. Court documents indicate that the surveillance footage from Walmart would serve as crucial evidence. Footage from 9:35 p.m. captured him at the store. And at 9:37 p.m., but it wasn't just the timing that raised suspicions, it was Holbrook's behavior on the surveillance footage. He was filmed at Walmart around 9:35 p.m., behaving oddly, possibly due to attempting to remove blood from his hands. The timeline was extremely problematic. At 9:29 p.m., the suspect contacted a woman. Drake remarked that Holbrook, who was quite large, had ample opportunity to kill Howard, who was significantly smaller. Holbrook had military training and had a fondness for knives. The prosecution argued that only Holbrook had the unimpeded opportunity to kill Howard. Even though Melissa Howard was murdered over 10 years ago, David Russell Holbrook Jr. was finally apprehended in November of 2016. On Tuesday, David Russell Holbrook Jr., age 42, was taken into custody at his home in Huntsville on charges of first-degree murder in connection to Melissa Howard's death. Holbrook was indicted by a grand jury in Okaloosa County. He was transferred to the Madison County Jail and subsequently sent back to Okaloosa County. Both families were stunned by the arrest. Melissa's family had waited over a decade for this moment. Finally, justice was moving forward for Melissa. However, for Holbrook, it marked the beginning of a legal battle that would determine whether he would spend the rest of his life behind bars for a crime he persistently denied. David Russell Holbrook Jr. could finally stand trial for murder. In February of 2019, the prosecution utilized DNA evidence from Melissa's sweatshirt. They aimed to build their case using Holbrook's suspicious timeline and his alarming visit just 2 days before the murder. Melissa's attorney, Janice Burke, presented compelling evidence when she recounted how terrified her client was. Following Holbrook's unnerving visit, Drake noted that Holbrook, being large in stature, had sufficient time to overpower Howard, who was considerably smaller. Holbrook's military background and his affinity for weapons were highlighted. The defense contended that the DNA evidence could have been planted during Holbrook's visit, attempting to shift the blame onto Chris instead. Nevertheless, the prosecution's timeline remained firm during this critical period. Only Holbrook had the opportunity, but that was undeniable. The conclusion was evident. After 6 days of testimony, Stephen David Holbrook was found guilty of intentionally murdering Melissa Howard in the first degree. It took 13 years to reach this point. David Russell Holbrook Jr. has been convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Melissa Howard, a woman from Florida. This verdict provided Melissa's family with the closure they had long awaited over the past 13 years. Court documents reveal that Holbrook will spend the rest of his life incarcerated. Indeed, justice was served, but it came at a steep price. Melissa Howard lost her life because she refused to relinquish control of her son, despite being threatened to do so. This wraps up the story. It's a case that prompts much reflection. The individuals involved were real, with genuine lives, families, and cherished memories. What transpired altered everything for them. It's easy to listen to these narratives and overlook that behind every detail and moment there are actual feelings and significant repercussions. Cases like this serve as a reminder of how swiftly circumstances can shift and how the truth isn't always apparent immediately. What happened altered everything for them. It's easy to listen to these narratives and overlook that behind every detail and every moment there are actual feelings and significant repercussions. Cases like this serve as a reminder of how swiftly circumstances can shift and how the truth isn't always readily apparent. At times, answers may take a while to surface, and sometimes they may not come at all. Yet every narrative like this one imparts valuable lessons about the choices we make in life. And it highlights just how delicate everything truly is. It goes beyond just the events that unfolded. It's about the lasting effects they create. Thank you for tuning in and for sticking around until the very end. If you found this video insightful or want to explore more cases like this, don't hesitate to give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you won't miss out on the next one. Take good care of yourself and those around you. I'll catch you in the next video.